Knock, knock. Who's there? The World Wide Web. Not you again. I thought I told you to go away. I'm trying to sleep. I know. But I just had to tell you about these 20 Facebook notifications, show you some more cat videos, and sell you some male enhancement products. Ever wonder how all that gets to your door? Stick around to find out. This is Media Channels, a multimedia corp production, bringing you information about the latest media trends, helpful tutorials, and commentary on the digital world around you. Welcome everyone, my name is Stuart Rathje, hosting episode number 10 of the Media Channels podcast on this 20th of September 2018. How websites work for the average person. Now, believe it or not, the World Wide Web was created nearly 30 years ago in 1989 by a British scientist at CERN named Tim Berners-lee. Ever since his invention hit the internet, it has taken on a life of its own. The web, as we call it today, is not the internet, but it is a standard that rides on top of the internet. Web pages, they run on a protocol called HTML, which stands for the Hypertext Text Markup Language. So HTML is a simplified programming language that is used to transfer data, typically from a server to a client. And how does this go over the internet and to your door or to your device? Well, the internet itself is connected to servers and computers all over the world. You may already know that. And it's connected in the same way that a spider web is connected to itself. So unlike spider webs, though, they are not constrained to a simple web, but they in fact have multiple webs that are spread out and connected in many different ways. So at any time, someone can connect to another web that is already connected to a web that to help extend its functionality. And this particular term is called peer-to-peer networking. Now, there is a governing organization. It is called IANA, which is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, and they're responsible for governing how the addresses and the names of the internet are distributed to the various countries and other organizations. So there are actually 13 root servers that are being managed by 13 different organizations currently, and they are responsible for controlling their area of the spider's web. So don't confuse this with the term www. I may be using the web in this sense, but it's not the same thing. So in the same way as a spider web, each intersecting hub on that spider's web is where data meets up. So hubs can literally have one connection that is attached to the rest of the internet, or it can have more than one. So every hub that is accessible via the public side of the internet is assigned what is called an IP address. Okay? So IP addresses are basically the same as postal addresses. Everyone has to have a postal address if you want to receive mail. Now, if you don't have a postal address or an IP address that you can piggyback off of, you can have a post office box or the post office itself. So some people do that where they receive their mail directly at their post office. And in that case, that's where they would also send and receive the internet data. So think about it the same way. So all the addresses that exist on the internet are like post offices, post office boxes, and mailing addresses to homes and apartments and so forth. So routers are responsible for directing traffic to ensure that it gets to the right location. So you probably have a router at home. If you don't, then you may be just connecting directly to your cell phone tower. And routers, they come from the term mail routing, and many of the terms used for the internet or on the internet are actually terms that are shared with or borrowed from common postal words as well. So the original intention of the internet was actually a U.S. Army and U.S. government based project. And when they started this project, they limited the number of addresses to roughly 4.3 million. So they weren't intending it to take off in the way that it has taken off today. Right now, there is a shortage of these addresses. Basically, what's happening is they're being, in a sense, doubled up or shared addresses. But there is a solution to the shortage of internet addresses, and that's IP version 6. So that's Internet Protocol version 6. Currently, most people are aware of IP version 4, which is Internet Protocol version 4. IP version 4 is what it started off as, and IP version 6 is where they're going right now. So you can actually get an IP version 6 address, but you probably won't be able to get it through your provider. You will have to do some technical stuff to get it, and it actually runs over the IP version 4 network in most cases to get an IP version 6 address. The thing with IP version 6 is, though, it has so many addresses that it's unlikely in the next 500 years we will run out of addresses. So that's the solution to that particular problem. Another solution to solve this problem was by the creation of private internets within one's own home or organization, and basically then sharing the connection of the public internet with the internal internet. And this is basically how the invention of the consumer router came about. So if you have a Wi-Fi router at home, what you're actually doing is you have a little private network on it, and it's sharing the public side of the internet. Now, these consumer routers, they use a method called network address translation to change the incoming and the outgoing, I'm going to say parcels, really they're packets, but for this video, parcels, and they change the parcel address to say that it's coming from another address, because when it's being sent out from the originating device, will have the internal address. So there's no way that an outside address will be able to recognize where that internal address is unless it has that public facing address. So these packets then return to the router after it's gone to their destination, and then the router keeps a list of connections, outgoing connections and incoming connections to it, and that's how it determines what goes where within your home or within your organization. So these packets will come back, and then the router will change the packet again to the local address in your network. Some of the other bits and pieces that run the internet and the World Wide Web are things such as obviously cabling. You have also hubs and switches. Hubs and switches, you just basically plug in many Ethernet cords into them. Sometimes if you go to a Best Buy or another computer shop, they could sell you a switch, and sometimes they have 5 ports or 8 ports and so forth. You also have Wi-Fi routers, which most people use on a daily basis. You have servers, web servers, and other specialized appliances, things such as filtering and whatnot to make sure that spam isn't going through into your organization. And there are other appliances as well, such as firewalls, and helps control the traffic going from point A to point B. So the World Wide Web itself is really just a collection of servers that are connected at the endpoints or the intersects of the spider's web. Okay, so each of these endpoints has an IP address. So your web host is really just a server sitting on one of these endpoints. And sometimes it's not even an endpoint. Sometimes it's connected by multiple points. In most cases, it's an endpoint. Anyone at any time that has a public IP address, now this will be assigned by your internet provider, can actually set up a web server to host a website if they really wanted to. Now, that's assuming the internet provider hasn't put up a firewall to block them from doing so. So web servers, they run on, the way you connect to it is through what's called ports. So each port will allow a certain type of connection to it. So for the internet, or for the World Wide Web, typically it's port 80. That would be the standard port. And then you have other ports for specialized internet services as well. So anyone, anytime can put up a web server and host a website. Now, people wouldn't really find the website, but it is technically there if someone wanted to see it. Now, firewalls are literally, like the name says they are, they're virtual walls that sit in between the internet and your home network or whatever it is that you're filtering. It could be a coffee shop or anything like that. So its job is to block data that's going in and out of that endpoint or the intersecting hub. Again, using the spider's web analogy. Now, the dark web, if you've ever heard the term dark web, the dark web operates on basically the fact that you don't need a name attached to your IP address. So anyone, as I said, can set up a web server on a public address. So if you have a public address assigned by a provider, you could set up a web server, and this is how the dark side of the web emerges. So the only way you're going to be able to get to these dark websites is through unpublicized addresses or names. So instead of www.google.com, there is no address associated with it. You would have to already know of the address and go to it to be able to see what's actually there. And most people wouldn't think to know to go to these addresses. So that's how you get these things like dark websites that are doing illegal activities. Now, all the websites, regardless of their dark web or regular web or anything, they run on some basic infrastructure, and there's a number of devices required to serve and retrieve a website or a web page. So the process is you have a client, you have a server, client requests information, the server sends back the information to the client. Okay, so any web page, its starting point is always going to be the IP address and the server that is connected to that IP address. Now, the server itself runs special software that will be usually on port 80. I mean, it could be set up on any port, and the port is just like a tunnel, just like a highway or anything like that. And it serves web pages and websites. And the three most popular server softwares right now for serving a website are Apache, okay, and that's Linux, Unix based. And Linux and Unix are maybe not something you heard of, but it's something that hackers and a lot of nerds such as myself will know about. The second most popular, according to the stats I found, are Nginx, and some people will actually pronounce it Nginx. According to their website, it's actually Nginx, okay? And then one that used to be more popular, but not as popular anymore, is simply Microsoft Internet Information Services, and they have their own ecosphere of web services as well that allows you to connect to all kinds of different things. So for the website to be accessed via a friendly name such as www.multimedia.ca, it has to have a URL that has been assigned into a domain name system zone, okay? So a domain name system zone is just basic information about how to access that web server from around the world. And this information is typically stored on DNS servers. Sometimes it's stored locally or on routers and whatnot, but typically DNS servers is where you would be getting the information about any particular website on the internet. Okay, so DNS zones are created usually by the domain name registrars, and domain name registrars are the company that manages your website name. So Microsoft.com, right? They have a registrar. Multimedia.ca have a particular register that manages it, and basically they keep a list of contact information, name of the website, who they are, and whatnot. And then sometimes also the hosting company itself. So maybe you have a GoDaddy website. So that would be the hosting services. They also do the registration aspect of it as well. And that would be the virtual name for your website. So when somebody decides, now I'm going to explain the process of how a website goes from point A to point B and how you get the information on your screen. So when somebody requests a website about a web address, this is what happens. For the sake of this example, I'm going to use two users. One is going to be called Chad, which is the user, and the other one is going to be called Widget, which is, I guess, the web server in this case. So Chad decides to open his browser and does either a search or types in the web address directly into his browser. Okay, so you can either type it into the search form, Google, Microsoft, or Bing and whatnot, or he types it into the address bar directly if he knows what it is, such as multimedia.ca. Chad's computer or device then asks its local DNS server, okay, so that stands for domain name resolution, resolution, and this server is usually on your ISP side, and it asks what the IP address of this particular name is. So Fred goes and says to the ISP, I need the IP address of www.widgets.com. Can you tell me what it is? I could use a little pick-me-up. Now, if Fred doesn't know the answer, which is the domain name provider, he asks one of his bros if they know anything about that widgets girl that he's been interested in. Now, this could be one of the upstream DNS servers with a little more authority, or a company that deals directly with the DNS entries itself. So Fred, he says, hey there, Fred, can you give me some information on widgets? Now, if Fred's bro doesn't know the answer, the request will fail, and then Fred will just simply shake his head and say, oh well, can't help you there, bud. You're on your own tonight. But if the transaction is successful, Fred replies back to Chad and says, hey, great news. I know what the address is of widgets.com. That'll be $1, please, for my time. Of course, I'm just kidding. Fred isn't a pimp, you know. He doesn't charge for his services. He does it for free because Fred is a real nice guy. And I'm sure he has a lot of lady friends. So once Chad has the address, Chad then requests over the internet of the IP address, okay, and then asks, hey, widgets, I want to see what you got to offer. Give me what you got. Widgets obviously is a little offended over this request and sends a reply, who the heck are you? I don't even know you. Why would I give you what I got? At least take me out to dinner first. Chad then replies who he is and says that he wants to make a connection with widgets, which is called the TCP connection. Okay, so that's one of the protocols that sits on top of the internet framework, and it stands for transmission control protocol. Okay, so widgets then decides to respond, well, it isn't like I have anything else going on tonight, and I have been a little lonely, and thinking to herself, maybe I can get a free meal out of this. So here you go. I will show you everything I have to offer. Chad is like, awesome, let's do this. And he gets what he was after. So the transaction then proceeds, and the TCP protocol then establishes a connection, and the information is transmitted back and forth through the network, which is basically the spider's web again, until it gets to its destination and until the full request of Chad is served. Okay, so all the information has to go back and forth before the connection stops. Chad then decides that he wants to browse the website for 5 minutes, searching for what he was looking for. Now, unfortunately, Chad finds out that the website was really just clickbait. And it had some issues on the website. And he figured out, you know what, this isn't really worth my time. And he says, see you around, widgets. See you later, Gator. And then Chad leaves the site, which is called bouncing. Okay, it's kind of funny that's called bouncing, but it actually is the real term, bouncing, when he decides to leave and close the site. And he goes on to search for something else. Now, the bounce will show up in the widget's Google Analytics graph. Okay, so Google Analytics is just a statistics page you can set up for your website that tells you who's going to your website, where they're coming from, and some basic demographics. Sometimes the sex is in there, sometimes the age and whatnot. It all depends on who's doing the browsing and what kind of browser they're using. And then widgets, because it's a clickbait website, now has a bounce rate of 90%. So that basically means that 9 out of 10 people who are visiting the website aren't finding what they're looking for and they're bouncing. So widgets then, it's like trying to wonder why she can't keep anyone interested on her website, on her widgets. So there you go. Now, sometimes bad things can happen to Chad as well, such as he experiences a website that's slow, websites that stop in mid-transfer, errors, viruses, or other issues. So slowdowns are usually because the connection has become bottlenecked with too many other Chads trying to access the same widgets at the same time. I mean, it could also be because the internet provider is having issues or the connection is just slow, but usually it's because there's a bottleneck and there's just too many Chads trying to get to her. And then one of the other issues is that websites can also stop outright because the original connection hasn't received a confirmation in a while, and it has been given the silent treatment, and the connection drops completely or it simply times out. So these errors usually show up in the form of, you may have seen this in your browser, you may not see this on your phone anymore, but definitely on your web browser on the computer, is connection reset by peer. So if you've ever wondered what that means, it basically just means that the connection has timed out and it's been given the silent treatment. It says, oh, I guess nothing's going on, I'll just ignore the request from now on. So the only way to solve this is to hit the refresh button or reload the page. And I'm sure you all do that once in a while. So Chad also sometimes gets errors. And he doesn't understand why he's getting these errors. He's getting all these errors all the time when he tries to browse certain websites. He doesn't really understand that the website and his browser just aren't compatible. So websites, or widgets in this case, expects Chad to be the most up-to-date, have the best browser, and pay for a subscription to be able to work with her widgets. Chad is actually happy, though, with his current browser, and he doesn't want to pay for a subscription either. So this is why some errors happen, is because of the compatibility reason. So he decides just to try another site and see if he can get lucky somewhere else. Chad also sometimes browses to a website that has malicious intentions to infect him. Now this is really bad, because widgets has served so many other Chads in the past, and in turn has become infected with malware and is spreading around. It may also be because the website doesn't have proper security measures in place, or it was simply just not paying attention to its configuration. So Chad, I would say in this case, hopefully has a good antivirus program. Perhaps, Chad, you should just stay away from websites like this and keep your own information private. On certain occasions too, Chad will go into a website and he finds out that the website just has so many issues and it's just so hard to navigate. But Chad was lured in because of all the flashy colors, the blinking bits, and a pleasing look. Maybe there's some nice photos of girls on there. Who knows why Chad was going to this flashy website. But unfortunately, Chad browses around the website. He doesn't really ever find what he's looking for because the website is full of visually appealing elements, is constantly begging for more money, and has no useful content. It's basically just full of hot air. So once Chad realizes that he has gotten what he's gotten into, he tries to close the web page. However, on this widget website, if he tries to leave, he gets bombarded with pop-ups, email messages, and other notifications that he can't leave, basically begging him to stay. Poor Chad. I don't know how you got into that situation, but I guess you will have to just Control-Alt-Delete that browser back into the Stone Age. And understandably, Chad is a little frustrated with his web browsing experience and decides to check his email and to go on Facebook instead. When Chad goes on to Facebook, however, he finds that the situation isn't much better, and he discovers that the widgets are all gossiping among themselves about how small his browser version was. Better luck next time, Chad. What a terrible situation that is. But basically, that is the nuts and bolts of how the web works. And there are many other aspects to it, obviously. Now, there are many protocols and standards that the modern web is based on. And some of these are HTML4 and 5. Okay, so HTML4 has been around forever and a day, basically almost since the beginning of the web. And HTML5 started becoming more popular about 3 to 4 years ago now, and it's basically taken over as the web standard. All modern browsers support this, but if you have something like IE8 or IE or Internet Explorer version 9, it probably doesn't have. Internet Explorer 8 definitely doesn't have HTML5 support, and Internet Explorer 9 has partial HTML5 support. Okay, there's also standards like Flash, that annoying interactive standard developed by Adobe. Used to be very popular back in the day, or my day anyways, and over the last 3 or 4 years it's been dropping off very quickly. For Flash to work, you need to download a browser plugin, and I know for sure that Android and iOS, your Apple devices, no longer support Flash natively. I think there are some hacks to get it working on there, but for the most intensive purposes, Flash has been slowly going away the dodo. Another standard is Java, and it is an older standard and was meant to replace many other development systems and sort of be like the all-encompassing standard for not just the web, but for appliances and everything in between as well. It is still used on the World Wide Web, but in many appliances actually that are web-based or internet-based appliances, and used a lot in the enterprise as well. There's a lot of development going on in the enterprise for custom applications. There was a browser plugin, Java browser plugin, but because it was plagued with so many security issues over the last 20 years or so, and it ran very, very slow as well. So Java, even though it's widely used in large companies, is rarely seen on the front end of a website anymore. I'd be hard pressed to find actually any websites that use Java on the front end anymore, where it would actually have to load Java just to be able to see the website. JavaScript, on the other hand, is the smaller brother of Java, and it is a scripting language rather than a full-blown programming language that sits inside your browser. The compatibility has been basically in the web browser since the early days, even including Netscape, which was one of the original browsers I used, and basically what everyone used to use. Netscape sort of went on its own. Firefox and Mozilla went on their own and sort of broke off from Netscape. So if you have Firefox, that's basically Netscape was the origin of that. A browser. I mean, it's changed a lot since, but that's how the history of that started. But JavaScript, it does help websites make them more interactive. If you ever seen a form that automatically calculates numbers or anything that's been automated, sometimes login scripts, sometimes you have timed events, something will pop up after a certain amount of time. Calendar systems usually run on JavaScript, and so on and so on. So it is still widely used today, but it isn't like the whole website usually runs on JavaScript. It's just usually certain aspects of it are running on JavaScript. Okay? And the main programming language you're going to run into, which you probably are not even aware of, that it's working behind the scenes, is a language called Hypertext Preprocessor, which is the short form for it is PHP. And PHP is what WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, and basically Wix, Squarespace, I mean, all these different web hosting platforms all use a content management, and they're all based on a PHP and HTML5 language. PHP is not required to run a website. You can run a website completely just in HTML5. You won't really be interactive, but I mean, for the most part. But it certainly helps running PHP because it takes care of a lot of features that just aren't built into the HTML5 protocol. So PHP runs on the server, and it does a lot of the back end stuff, such as connecting to a database, collecting information, and dealing with all kinds of different ways of interacting with the user. So the most popular method for delivering content, other than custom-made solutions, such as Facebook, yes, and the most popular are WordPress, and then you have Drupal is fairly popular for corporations, and you have CMSs called Joomla, which I used for quite a few years, and I don't use it much anymore. There's also ASP variations, and that's the system that Microsoft has created, and they have many variations of that. I believe ASP.NET is what they're currently working with. Sometimes shopping carts will be based on Microsoft ASP. And then strictly you have HTML5, which is basically a non-interactive version of a website. There are many more methods, but those cover the bulk of the majority right now. There are tons of other systems out there. So with the exception of HTML5, changes can be made on the fly with these other systems. So that's what makes it appealing to most users, that they can easily change things around without having to hire a web developer. If you go with the HTML5 route and dump the interactivity, you will definitely need a web developer to make any changes, because typically you're working directly with the code in some manner or another. There's also CSS, which is style sheets, and style sheets are not really a programming language per se, but it's a feature. It's an add-on to the HTML spec that allows you to style elements within your web page, so colors and font sizes, and there's many other things in there. But CSS is something that's very important to websites as well. Without CSS, designing websites would be very static, and you wouldn't be able to make changes not nearly as easily to how something looks. HTML websites, they don't rely on a database at all, but all the above mentioned systems such as WordPress and Facebook all rely on databases to keep information about its users and whatever other information they need to store handy. So databases are a large part of the web ecosphere right now, and typically many smaller websites will run a form of SQL, which is the short form for that is SQL, which you may see seen on the web once in a while. And larger enterprises will more likely opt for an Oracle type database. And databases, I mean, if you don't know what a database is, databases are simply tables of information that contain columns and rows, just like a spreadsheet, okay? There are also some less common databases being used as well out there, but SQL and Oracle database are probably going to be the two that are around the most and utilized the most out of all of them. Without a database, logins and passwords will be virtually impossible to do. I mean, not going to say it's impossible, but virtually impossible. So that's why databases are super important. It stores the information and keeps it accurate. And databases, they have to be and must be secured very well to prevent hackers from getting personal information, such as credit card numbers and passwords. And over the last, I would say, 25 years, there have been a number of high-profile cases where database information was leaked onto or dumped onto the internet, and usually it's because of some security issues with the implementation of the software they're using, the PHP implementation, or the web standard that they're using. It could also be because of sloppy security practices. People are not configuring the databases correctly and are leaving them open, or there could be a vulnerability or a bug in some software. So sometimes these databases get dumped onto the internet, and that's how hackers will sometimes get into your Facebook or website as well. So that's why databases, they tend to be a target for hackers, because it's basically a treasure trove of information about anything and anybody, credit card numbers, and so forth. So when it comes to security on the internet, securing the connection itself is typically done through a protocol called Secure SOCKS Layer, or SSL. Okay, that's a short form, SSL. An SSL is an encryption method that secures your data across insecure communications. So, in fact, Google will favor websites in their search engine that have an SSL certificate attached to it, to their website. So SSL certificates can either be purchased or generated for free. Free certificates usually have absolutely no authority, so I could right now create an SSL certificate on my computer, but it would have no authority. No one would recognize it. So from a security standard, they are recommended only for internal use. If you have an internal server or an internal website that's not accessible to the public, that's maybe one situation where you'd use a free certificate. Now, if you've ever gone to a website and seen an error in the browser window that says this site is not secure, it's trying to take your information, or maybe it says that it's not private, are you sure you want to continue? This would be caused because the SSL certificate that is installed on that website is usually either a free, non-authoritative certificate, or is an improperly configured certificate on the website it was purchased for. So if you're seeing these error messages when you're going to a website, to a public website, maybe a banking site, then definitely do not log in or do anything with that website. Just click and go somewhere else. Just don't do it, because you'll run into problems down the road. Hackers will try to steal your information. And I can't stress this enough, but SSL certificates are super important if you're doing any sort of website that has a login page, if you have bank information or credit card numbers that you're transmitting back and forth, or any other sensitive information. So having an SSL certificate is super important because it helps secure the connection between the 2 points. If you didn't have that SSL certificate, what happens is that the information being transferred back and forth is basically in clear text, and clear text basically means that it's not encoded, and anyone with a sniffer, as I explained what it was in the last video I did, will be able to snoop on the information and get that information. So having an SSL certificate is something you should definitely do if you're using sensitive information. Now, if you ever go to a website and you want to know if the website is secure with a SSL certificate, you can look in the top right corner where the address bar is, and you will see there will be, usually it'll be HTTP or HTTPS at the beginning of the URL. Okay, so the URL address is just your web address, www.multimedia.ca, right? And beside that address bar, which is usually at the very, very top of your address browser, is an icon that will show a lock or a lock that is unlocked. So if it looks like, at least on the Chrome browser, it looks like a lock that's locked up, like a padlock. And if you click on the lock beside the address, it will reveal the information about the certificate, the credentials of the company itself, and who the issuer of the certificate was. Okay, so there are a number of authoritative certificate issuers out there. Some of the popular companies are Global Sign, which is what I use for my clients typically. There's VeriSign. Komodo, I've also used them in the past. Network Solutions, and many other companies such as semantic-based certificate authorities. Okay. For a SSL certificate to have any credence or authority, they need to have that authority with popular web browsers. Otherwise, they mean absolutely nothing. The three things that make an SSL certificate to have authority are, number one, is the reputation of the company. Okay. Number two is how long the company has been in business. And number three, if the major browsers, including older versions of browsers, maybe not browsers from 10 years ago, but at least maybe 5 years ago, if these browsers recognize the companies as having been legitimate and authoritative. Okay. Number three is essentially, well, it is the most important, because if your browser doesn't recognize that their certificate isn't labeled as secure, then it won't recognize it as secure. And you'll get that window where it says, this is not a secure browsing website, blah, 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 blah. What do you want to do? Do you want to continue or not, basically? Now, there is one side effect of this. There is one company in particular whose name is Google. And Google, being the developer of one of the most popular web browsers in history, is now issuing its own SSL certificates for itself across a majority of its services. So it is essentially self-verifying that its web services are secure. And in my opinion, I think this is a conflict of interest. But in reality, I have to admit that in practice, it really makes little difference, because Google being as big as it is, everyone knows who they are. Okay? Everyone and their dog, and they've been around for a long time, so no one's going to really question Google as an authority, really. So, but if it was a smaller company and they were doing that, there's no way they would get away with it. Now, the other problem I see with this is I wouldn't doubt it if in the future that they stop supporting certificates from other providers. And they already did this earlier in the year for semantic-based certificates prior to 2016. So if you had an SSL certificate from 2015 that was good for 10 years, you can buy them by yearly, 5 years, however long you need to buy them for. If you had a 10-year certificate and it was issued by Symantec, which is the same company who produces Norton, then you're basically out of luck. So if you try to go to it with the Chrome browser, it's going to give you that warning message that this site is not secure. What do you want to do? So that can create a real problem for customers. Now, I'm not aware of any big companies that were using these types of certificates, but I'm sure they're out there. People are probably very angry that their certificates are no longer being recognized. And their customers are probably wondering why, when they go to their website, they're getting these weird errors. So, in essence, what is really stopping Google from issuing their own certificates to customers in the future and then forcing everyone into their own ecosphere? I mean, what if they remove support for all the other providers and now they only want to support their own certificates? So if you have an opinion on this particular development, I would like to know about it. Please leave a message in the comments, and I'm just curious about what other people think about this. And there are many other ways or security methods in place to help secure a website, which does actually go beyond the scope of this podcast. But in the end, I think that we can agree that monopolies are bad, especially when you're Google or Microsoft, unless you're the one that owns that last street address on the Monopoly board game and bringing in serious cash. Probably not too happy about the situation. But anyways, that would conclude that. And I hope that you enjoyed this rundown on how the World Wide Web works. So thank you for watching or listening. If there is anything I missed or you want to ask a question in the comments, please feel free to do so. To view or listen to more of these podcasts, like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel using the watermark in the bottom right corner, or follow me on Twitter. You can also listen to these episodes on popular podcasting platforms such as iTunes and Stitcher and so on. For a full list of the podcasting platforms, please see the description or visit our website at multimedia.ca/media-channels. And I really do appreciate your support. And to all my people kind, have a happy and safe web browsing experience. And don't let Trudy get you down.